Page 47. The Invisible Man. One winter's day, Mrs. Hall, the owner of the Coach and Horses Inn, received a mysterious visitor. It had been snowing heavily, and the visitor was very wet and cold. Mrs. Hall made him dinner, but in the kitchen she realized she had forgotten the mustard. She went back to his room. She put down the mustard pot on the table, and then she noticed the overcoat and hat had been taken off and put over a chair in front of the fire, and a pair of wet boots lay on the floor. She went to these things resolutely. "I suppose I may have them to dry now," she said. "Leave the hat," said the visitor, in a muffled voice, and turning, she saw he had raised his head and was sitting and looking at her. For a moment she stood gaping at him, too surprised to speak. He held a white cloth. It was a serviette he had brought with him, over the lower part of his face, so that his mouth and jaws were completely hidden, and that was the reason of his muffled voice. But it was not that which startled Mrs. Hall. It was the fact that all his forehead above his blue glasses was covered by a white bandage, and that another covered his ears, leaving not a scrap of his face exposed, excepting only his pink-peaked nose. It was bright, pink and shiny, just as it had been earlier. He wore a dark brown velvet jacket with a high black collar turned up about his neck. The thick black hair, escaping as it could below and between the cross bandages, projected in curious tails and horns, giving him the strangest appearance conceivable. This muffled and bandaged head was so unlike what she had anticipated that for a moment she was rigid. Her nerves began to recover from the shock they had received. She placed the head on the chair again by the fire. "I didn't know, sir," she began, "that—" and she stopped, embarrassed. "Thank you," he said dryly, glancing from her to the door, and then at her again. "I'll have them nicely dried, sir, at once," she said, and carried his clothes out of the room.